Let's jump right into this explainer. When we look at ancient texts, we usually think of, religious allegory or dusty, untouchable myths. But what if we read them differently? By pulling together all these incredible visual sources and texts today, we're exploring a wild theory. What if these ancient records actually describe a highly advanced, complex technology operating system? We're going to unpack the hidden architecture running just beneath the surface of our reality. And we'll uncover the survival codes that connect the deepest mysteries of the ancient world directly to the inescapable digital matrix we're all living in today. Now, it sounds kind of crazy, right? But the source materials draw a literal, direct line between the psychological anxiety of our modern, screen-obsessed world and the terrifying biological anomalies of the ancient world. Think about that constant hum of digital noise and the sheer exhaustion you feel from staring at your screens. The text suggests it's not just a modern accident. What if that exact feeling, the destruction of ancient cities, and those bizarre 3-meter genetic mutations are all part of the exact same survival code? According to this material, we might actually be trapped in a loop, running the exact same corrupted software that triggered massive systemic resets thousands of years ago. To really understand this so-called glitch, we need to go back to a baseline. Imagine the ancient world as a perfectly uncorrupted operating system. Look at this atmosphere. Before the system was compromised, it was an environment of absolute balance. The physical and the dimensional were strictly separated by this unyielding barrier. No noise, no corruption, just the pure original code running incredibly smoothly in the background. But, well, as we know with literally any system, eventually things get hacked. Okay, let's dive into this contrast. We have that ancient, calm baseline completely shattered by the fractured, chaotic reality of our modern condition. The Hebrew text in these source diagrams specifically points to a human trust crisis. Think about that. The documents argue we are living through a massive data crisis, where the noise is just too overwhelming to process. And in a world absolutely drowning in artificial noise, humanity has always searched for an absolute, unyielding anchor, right? An immutable foundation stone just to ground us. But here's the catch. To find that anchor, the texts suggest we actually have to bypass the labels put in place to blind us. Throughout history, specific geographical coordinates were literally rebranded to hide their terrifying true nature. The ancient original codes like Sinir, Luz, and Siddim were painted over with religious labels you probably recognize: Mount Hermon, Bethel, and the Dead Sea. The ancient texts, like the Book of Enoch, are incredibly specific here. They don't just describe Mount Hermon as a pretty mountain. No, they describe it as an exact, literal landing zone for non-human entities, the precise coordinate where foreign DNA breached our physical system. And man, that breach had severe biological consequences. We've all heard the fairy tales, right? But the reality of giants like Goliath presented in these sources is deeply unsettling. We are looking at dynastic breeding programs, remnants of mythological Nephilim DNA, and severe physiological mutations like acromegaly and polydactyly. That means having 6 fingers and toes, which, let's be honest, would make buying gloves a complete nightmare, but on a battlefield, absolutely terrifying. These weren't just monsters under the bed. They were 3-meter-tall genetic anomalies, intentionally cultivated as living weapons of war. They were biological glitches running completely rampant. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly where all this geographical and genetic corruption was centered. The tactical map from our sources treats the Dead Sea region not just as geography, but as a strategic anatomy. It treats the land itself like a massive circuit board, where energy, data, and bloodlines were constantly colliding. It's wild. The ancient texts actually track the movement of these genetic mutations right through the specific, highly charged topography. Of course, when a system gets too corrupted, a reset is triggered. And that brings us to the ultimate survival code, the Ark. What's fascinating here is that the original text only ever uses the specific word for Ark, teva, exactly twice. Once for Noah and once for Moses. And guess what? Neither of them were shits. Breaking down all our sources, it shows they were actually sealed survival capsules built to withstand absolute destruction. No sails, no rudders, absolutely no engines. The mechanism required zero control, total surrender. To survive the massive systemic wipeout outside, the occupant literally had to give up the illusion of steering. So you might be wondering, why was geography so critical to these resets? Well, it's because the ancient world didn't view the Earth as just dead rock. These sources map it as a living, breathing organism, a geographic nervous system, if you will. Mountains and valleys weren't just terrain, they were a network of energy pipelines and dimensional intersections. and then the code was breached by those ancient anomalies we talked about, this physical network could literally bleed. Now, what's really interesting about this circulation system is how the source material maps it out with such incredible precision. Jerusalem acts as the beating heart, the ultimate anchor of truth, pumping vitality straight into the system. But down below, at the lowest point on Earth, sits the Dead Sea. According to the schematics, this wasn't just a salty lake, it was the ultimate server, the final hard drive serving as the drainage basin, permanently storing the corrupted data and the fallout of the destroyed ancient world. The sources describe the ultimate data purge happening right at that specific server during the catastrophe of Sodom. And the texts treat this not as a metaphor, but as a literal nuclear-level event. Whether it was a massive tectonic explosion of subterranean sulfur and gas along the rift, or a 2000-degree cosmic asteroid impact that instantly melted flesh and rock, the result was exactly the same. A thriving civilization was instantaneously vaporized. The system essentially deployed an absolute firewall of heat and sulfur to just wipe the corrupted slate completely clean. But the system wasn't entirely sterilized. There are these shadowy, untamed forces that the texts say still exist right on the fringes of this architecture. Take this incredibly eerie quote from Isaiah 34, describing the desolate ruins where the great owl makes her nest under the shadows. The sources use this to highlight the ancient, darker secrets of the system. We're talking about untamed entities, like the concept of Lilith, anomalies that dwell in the gaps in the ruins, just waiting in the darkness, where the pure light of the code doesn't perfectly reach. And that brings us to a pretty profound mystery highlighted by our texts, the Genesis split. If you look really closely at the source code, there is a glaring gap between the creation described in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. So what hidden truth actually lies in that gap? Well, the material suggests that alternative, hidden entities and sort of test runs were formed before the official polished narrative of Adam and Eve. It implies a much darker, much more complex reality where the system was tweaking and testing its creations long before humanity even took the stage. To make sense of this, the source material suggests viewing the creator not as some rigid programmer of obedient robots, but as an artist. The shadows, the glitches, the so-called bugs in the system, they're actually framed as features. They are part of a chaotic real-time quality control test. The system was basically designed to test human free will, rebellion, and choice. The chaos wasn't a mistake. It was the crucible required to forge something that could choose truth completely on its own. Let's move along and see how this builds, because following this timeline in the sources, we see a direct chronological sequence of survival leading right into our current reality. We move from the physical firewall of Sodom's destruction, to Moses being preserved in the Ark capsule, then to the prophet Daniel, navigating his exile in a highly complex Babylonian empire. And that leads completely and inevitably to our modern internet age. The battlefield has shifted from physical weapons and genetic giants to psychological and digital warfare, for sure. But the underlying survival code, it remains exactly the same. In this ongoing simulation mapped out by the texts, specifically labeled Simulation B in the Hebrew documents, Moses acted as a truly critical anchor. Think about it. When the system looked at the flawed, corrupted flesh and blood of humanity and wanted to run yet another total wipeout, Moses stepped in. He anchored the entire network. He literally offered to let himself be erased from the source code rather than let humanity be destroyed. He forced the system to keep working with the broken, real-time material of human existence. Then, centuries later, Daniel found himself trapped in Babylon, which was basically the ancient equivalent of a highly advanced, incredibly noisy technological matrix. And how did he survive? Well, he didn't fight with swords. He tapped into what the ancients called the source frequency. By fasting, by totally refusing to consume the artificial data and food of the empire, Daniel purged the noise. He achieved internal hydration and clarity without any external effort. He connected directly to the pure, crystalline data of the original code. Which brings us right to you and the modern digital prison. The texts make a hard-hitting point here. The modern internet, those phones and screens we stare at all day, functions exactly like the manipulative little horn that Daniel warned about. It has eyes that constantly spy on us and a mouth that speaks artificial noise, totally distorting time and truth. It's literally a machine generating endless noise, causing our modern psychological swelling, our exhaustion, and our physical anxiety. We are completely drowning in a simulated matrix that blocks out actual reality.
But don't worry, the sources do point to a way out. Just like Daniel fasting to purge the system's noise, we have to break open the digital crust of our modern lives. Beneath the barren, chaotic landscape of our screen-obsessed world, the ancient, pure crystal frequency, the Bedalock, is still glowing. It's right there, waiting in the bedrock. But accessing it requires a fracture. We have to aggressively crack open our artificial habits to reveal the unyielding truth hidden right underneath. When that fracture finally happens, golden light begins piercing the tectonic rift, completely flooding the barren landscape. Now, this is not a gentle process. It is the painful but absolutely necessary process of pure light burning away the superficial digital noise that causes all our mental exhaustion. It is the firewall returning. But this time, it's not here to destroy us, it's here to burn away the false layers, leaving only what is absolutely real and immutable. So the crucial point is this. This light represents humanity's next true evolution based on these ancient codes. By actually stepping away from the screen and absorbing this crystal frequency, the human form becomes incandescent. We stop being these reactive consumers of artificial noise, and we transform into pure vessels of truth and living data. And as this internal frequency purifies, the barren wasteland around us, it literally begins to bloom with life. This internal transformation doesn't just heal the individual, though. It totally harmonizes the external world. Look at how the wildlife returns, completely drawn to the purified frequency. The ancient breach between the physical and the dimensional is finally being repaired. By holding onto this pure internal anchor, all that chaos just subsides. It gets replaced by harmonious, crystalline pearls of wisdom scattered across a fully restored landscape. And here we have the final transformation outlined in all our sources, escaping the digital noise to become pure, absolute white light. It is the ultimate freedom of totally disconnecting from the artificial matrix. You are no longer swollen with the anxiety of the endless newsfeed or the illusions of the screen. Instead, you embody the pure crystal frequency of the original code, fully illuminated, requiring absolutely no external validation from the system. We've explored the ancient anomalies, the geological servers, and the blueprints for the capsules designed to survive the wipeout. The architecture mapped in these texts is just undeniable. And it suggests the battle has moved straight into our own minds. The digital noise is deafening, sure, but the crystal is right beneath the surface. So what does this all mean for us? The question left to ponder is this. Are you ready to stop feeding the machine, step away from the screen, and finally reconnect to the pure frequency of the original code? Thanks for diving into this explainer with us.